good. All right, we'll call the regular meeting of the Town of Culpeper Planning Commission to order. We could have the call of the roll, please.
Mr. Serio.
Here.
Mr. Flanagan.
Here.
Ms. Taylor.
I'm here.
Mr. Clements.
Here.
Mr. Fitzsimmons is absent. We do have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, comments and correspondence from citizens, visitors, and delegations in the audience. Items not on the agenda. That would be anything that isn't referred to the rezoning and the text amendment to the zoning ordinance. All right, is there any unfinished business?
No, sir.
New business.
All right, we have our first public hearing this evening. I want to introduce to the Planning Commission, Mr. Louis Pancotti. He's our new planner started. So we figured we'd throw him into the deep end and hand him a rezoning for his first meeting. So he'll be leading the staff presentation on this case.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the Commission. I'll be presenting the staff report for rezoning case number 4339-2023. This is a rezoning or a request to rezone parcel 41A14Q7 from C1 Neighborhood Commercial to C2 Central Commercial. The owner is Asher and Main LLC, and the addresses for the property are 604 through 612 South Main Street. The reasoning for the request is to allow a commercial school within the existing building. The property is located at the corner of South Main Street and West Asher Street. It has vehicle entrances off of West Asher and a parking lot behind the building. Unreality LLC is moving into the spaces that were previously occupied by Ed's Award and Engraving. The owner of the business describes the operation as a state-of-the-art smokeless range and technology lounge providing customizable professional development, education, and entertainment via virtual and augmented reality. The facility can offer training certificates to first responders and law enforcement, and as well as the public for skills such as firearm safety. The facility will also offer entertainment-focused platforms for customers. It is estimated that the facility will serve roughly 12 guests to two employees at one time. There are no exterior changes to the building or to the site that are proposed as part of this request, and all currently approved uses within the building are permitted in both C1 and C2. It was determined by the zoning administrator that this use best aligns with the ordinance's definition of a commercial school. The zoning ordinance defines a commercial school as a business that is available to the public for a fee whose primary operation is to instruct clients in a particular skill or activity. Representative examples include dance studios, music studios, aerobic or fitness classes, craft and/or art studios, and other similar schools of instruction. Since this use is not permitted in the C1 zoning district, a rezoning to C2 is necessary. As seen on this map, parcels zoned C2 are located one block to the north and even right across the street a little to the south, and parcels that are zoned C3 are located to the south. The property is located within the central business and town center character area, the downtown urban development growth area, and the business investment areas designated in the comprehensive plan. Both the C1 and C2 zoning districts are recommended zoning districts in the mixed-use/commercial future land use. The proposal also would promote the use of the existing structure, present employment opportunities, and provide a diversity in businesses as recommended by the comprehensive plan. The Planning Commission has the option to either recommend approval or denial to the Town Council for this request. And if you have any questions for staff, I'd be happy to answer them. And I do believe the applicant is here if you have any questions for them. Thank you.
public hearing or discussion? All right, I'm gonna go ahead and open the public hearing, REZ 4339-2023 rezoning of parcel to Central Commercial District C2. Anybody like to speak about this rezoning?
Good evening, Jeffrey Mitchell. I live in the West Fairfax district. I'm looking at this property and wondering a number of things about this change. It has been a school before. There was a music school there. That's something we've already seen in that building. The entrance and exits on that, I question certainly the ADA on that, but if we're looking at it, there's no pedestrian accommodations on the adjacent street. So Asher has no sidewalks, and it's a narrow street. Moreover, the building comes all the way to the lot line. This is relevant to me is that you can't see to make the turn clearly around there. Even on my bicycle, I have to swing wide to be able, and frequently cars come in the opposite direction or in the center lane because they don't expect somebody on such a narrow road. So if we look at this and say we're changing this that has later potential, not necessarily just for this applicant, but what are we doing with this property? We're putting something that has a little bit heavier use right up against a residential neighborhood on a street that has no pedestrian accommodation, adjacent from another property that's dormant right now, and another property that is yet to be redeveloped. So I'm looking at this not today, but maybe 3 years, maybe 30 down the road, and asking, is this the right decision for the community to put something of more density in there? And lastly, if it's a commercial school, that fits the school I went to. We started as a small one in a electronics building in a residential neighborhood. The school that I went to as a kid now covers an entire city block. There's a potential for other schools to come in beyond this and say that. Maybe this group is incredibly successful and realizes they need a larger venue to operate what they do. The next person says, we can put a small school in there and teach in there. Now we're putting children in there and vehicles in and out and on the side of the street where there is no pedestrian accommodation. So it's not so much that I'm opposed to this use, but seeing it has been done before, there's education in there, and wasn't an issue at that time, why now? And is this the right thing long-term? Thank you.
Mitchell? Is there anyone else who'd like to address us? Please come forward and state your name and address, please.
Sure, thank you very much. My name is Sean Fuller. I live at 845 Foxton Road, Culpeper, in the town. I'd like to just address a couple different things. The first is that, Mr. Red's business, coming from 25 years of law enforcement experience and actually using a very similar facility than what he's proposing here in Northern Virginia at the law enforcement agency that I was with, provided some terrific training for our law enforcement officials that we had in the county. Our county doesn't have that. Our town police doesn't have that. So having the ability to, number one, train our law enforcement professionals in this environment does a couple different things. One, it puts them in high pressure training, which is desperately needed in law enforcement. The other thing that it does is it puts them in a position where you're not introducing ammunition. So it's much safer. Currently, if any of the, if the town police or the county sheriff's office wants to, go through any training like this, they've got to drive quite the distance to get to it. The closest one that I'm aware of is Prince William County, and then further north. So obviously that's increasing their budget for travel, training, and things of that nature when we can do it right here. It's just a win-win for law enforcement all the way around. It's safe. The other thing I'd like to bring up is what it does for our citizenry. We have a lot of folks in Culpeper in the town and county that utilize firearms, whether it's for hunting, for safety, or just recreational shooting. What this environment does is it provides a safe place for that. We have kids that are growing up using shotguns and handguns and things of that nature for hunting and other uses, and this provides a place where they can train safely. It gives them the ability to understand firearms, they understand how to utilize them, they understand how to be proficient with them and safe with them. And then if you move into folks that are just looking to get conditional permits or concealed permits and things of that nature. It provides an environment for them to train. One thing in law enforcement I found over years, especially working homicide, we did all of the different shootings and things of that nature, and there were a lot of negligent discharges. And what happens is when people get training for their concealed permits, that's typically the last time they train. It isn't a routine thing. And so we found in law enforcement you'd have a lot of negligent discharges because people just did not know what they were doing with their handguns. This also provides that environment where, number one, it's safe. You're not introducing ammunition, and people can be safe, proficient, and comfortable with what they're carrying. So to me, it's a win-win scenario. It's a safe environment, and I just highly encourage it, not only for our local law enforcement, but for the citizens of the county and town. I really appreciate y'all letting me speak tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to speak for the public hearing? Okay, I'm going to ask again because last meeting somebody didn't hear me. So I wanted to know if there was anyone else who would like to come and speak about this case for the rezoning. Hearing none, seeing none, the public hearing is closed. Thank you.
Chairman?
Yes,
May
sir.
I ask a question? What other businesses are in that building? I saw a physical therapy sign out in front of it.
Yes, there is a physical therapy business. There's also a hair salon, and I believe also a landscaping office
Okay.
is in there. Am I missing another one? Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Director, if you could refresh our memory as to why the rezoning needs to occur for this particular business to move forward?
Certainly. The commercial school use is not a permitted use within the C1 district. And so in order for the operation to occur, currently Mr. Red is operating his business as an institutional use, serving only institutions such as the police department, fire department, churches, and not operating in a sort of primarily commercial manner. In order for him to transition and engage in those other activities as well, he needs that ability to transition essentially from the institutional uses he's serving currently to more of a commercial education one, which requires that rezoning to the C2 district at a minimum.
Yes, sir.
Will there be enough parking?
There is, we've evaluated the number of attendees that he anticipates having there against the parking standards, and there is adequate parking in that lot.
Even with the other businesses?
Correct, yes.
I have a question for the applicant. That's okay. Can you just give us some sense of what a day-to-day would be? I mean, in terms of like what time would you open? What kind of crowd would you have? When would you close?
Sure. So the business, I actually intend to have later hours. So it would be open 3:30 in the afternoon till in the evening time, 8:30 or 9 o'clock at night. So it would be generally available so that when people get off of work, then they could come in and take advantage of the facility. Another point to what Andrew was saying there is that primarily the way this is focused and centered is I can only service those law enforcement and religious institutions, and that is a primary goal of mine. But I want to be able to offer those services to law enforcement and those religious institutions at low cost or no cost. So in order for me to do that, I have to open up that base a little bit so that I can involve the public as well, because I really just want a strong law enforcement presence at the facility. The equipment, I've got over $100,000 in very high-end technical equipment, and I'd like to maintain that strong law enforcement presence around there.
And then just one other question. So based on some social media and website information that I think is associated with your business, would there be some sort of like arcade element to this?
Well, there could be. It's a secondary possible use. There's only so many stations. Again, these are fixed platforms. It's It's a really new technology. VR is a new technology in itself, but this isn't just VR. These are headsets in combination with platforms. So it's a platform that you would physically strap into, you'd get harnessed into, and then you have 360 degrees of natural movement in a virtual environment. So when you run on the platform, when you move left, move right on the platform, which you are fixed to, so you're not going anywhere, but you're on this platform, you can go anywhere in the environment. But you're restricted by the number of stations that are available. So I couldn't have a large presence in the building because there just wouldn't be enough. There wouldn't be enough platforms for them to be able to take advantage.
In truth, just for full disclosure, that this was something we looked at closely when trying to determine what the appropriate use was, because the initial business license that came in, I believe it indicated as an arcade. But when we had the conversations about what truly was going on there, the fact that certificates would be offered for the training, the limited nature of it, the fact that it's sort of got limited commercial recreational applicability, it's much more of a commercial training thing. The commercial school was seen as the more appropriate primary designation for the use.
Roger.
Tell us your name and everything for the record, or
Yes, ma'am. My name is Robert Redd. I live at 9527 Hollow Oak Court in Culpeper. Sorry.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion?
I just had a question or maybe a comment. I think we discussed some of Mr. Mitchell's issues when we first brought this up before, what it could be now versus if that leaves, what it could be later, and the pitfalls that may occur with that. But given the limitations of the parking, would that, I guess, confine any other business that goes in subsequent to this, if this does move out to something else? It would avoid the problems, I guess, that he was referring to with getting too.
Yes, the proposed use and the anticipated parking from this comes fairly close to maximizing out the existing parking lot. So again, in terms of intensifying the development there, they likely would need to find some additional accommodations for parking in that instance.
All right, is there a motion to move this forward?
Sure, I'll move that we send this to council with the recommendation to approve.
Any additional discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Send that to the planning, to the town council with a recommendation of approval. We have public hearing for the zoning ordinance text amendment.
Yeah, Mr. Cruz will be leading this. Give him one moment, I think. Yeah, we moved on, yeah.
You're up.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry. I'll have to ask you all to bear with me a little bit. I do have something
I got
choking
it
me
too.
up a little bit, so.
I got it too, so we may be taking turns.
If I have a fit, just be
Having a
patient.
full staff.
Sure. So, on behalf of the Architectural Review Board, the Planning Commission's been asked to review and make a recommendation on 2 zoning ordinance amendments relating to 1, repeat request to the ARB after a denial of a certificate of finding, as well as the expiration period for approved request. So for some background, the ARB has seen multiple instances in the last several years where an applicant's request for a certificate of finding is denied, and they proceed to make a second application covering that same work in a short period of time. Since applicants are allowed to appeal a denial by the ARB to town council, this creates a sort of loop where an applicant can continue to make requests and then continue to make appeals, and again, it just sort of creating a loop there. So typically, there are provisions in place that require a period of time to pass before a denied request can be brought back before a board or commission without substantial changes being made to that request. This would be the case for things like rezonings and conditional use permits where there is a year required between a denial and a reapplication. We don't currently have a provision to that effect for certificates of finding. With that, there's a proposed addition to section 27352H that would stipulate that a denied request could not be brought back before the ARB for at least a year unless substantive changes were made to that application. I've got the specific code language on the screen. You can see there's already a similar provision in place for the conditional use permit. So the new language, the Architectural Review Board shall not consider any request for the erection, reconstruction, alteration of a structure which has been denied for a period of 1 year, except in cases where an applicant appears with an application substantively amended. For the purpose of the provision, substantively amended will include changes on the application to one or more of the following features which contributed to the initial denial on the application. And then it goes on to list the design, arrangement, mass or dimensions, material or location of the work. And again, the idea would be to protect against just a random change, getting them back in front. It would be tied to the reason for the initial denial.
May I say something? Why don't you put in there that they have to correct the reason for the original denial?
The tricky thing with that is sometimes they may come back with something significantly different in terms of its intent as well from the original denial. So this just gives the flexibility of not locking them into address, because sometimes, again, it's shades of gray as to what may have contributed to the denial, but also if they wanted to pivot completely and come back with something completely different, they're able to do so.
Oh, sure. But the ARB is very good about telling you why they deny it. So that should be addressed.
Right, and that's largely what, again, that last sentence, in terms of the identifying those features that contributed to it. So the intent is there. We don't want to unfairly prohibit someone from coming back who is trying to make changes, but they're maybe not able to get all the way with what the ARB had identified.
Oh, I didn't mean that.
I think the other...
yeah, no, I understand.
Yeah, okay. So, additionally, approved certificates of finding currently don't expire for a period of 5 years. This means that an applicant would have 5 years to begin approved work before the approval of that certificate would sort of be null and void. In discussion and review of this language, the ARB considers this 5-year window to be a bit wider than it's comfortable with, since approvals could end up outliving changes to the board, as well as changes to our local design regulations. Instead, they're looking at a 2-year window, which is more similar to other boards across the state. So along with the reduction in the expiration window for beginning approved work, it's also proposed to add an expiration to work that is begun and then stopped or abandoned for an excessive period of time. So there's currently nothing in place to this effect. This leaves us with the threat of unfinished work within the historic district. Just to clarify, these provisions wouldn't apply to ongoing work, so there's not a rule that you have to finish your work by a certain period of time. This is more about a time frame for starting that work and a time frame if that work is abandoned, needing to come back for additional approval.
I have a question on this slide real quick.
Yes, sir.
Just while we're looking at this, is there, obviously, above that, and what is not changing is the approval of a zoning permit or conditional use permit shall be valid for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Would the same logic also apply in that case? I
think it certainly could. I would say our conditional use permits are usually a little more generous from my experience. A zoning permit, I would say, extremely generous for 5 years. I think some of these, Andrew can maybe correct me, I think maybe looked at with the overhaul to the zoning ordinance, the specific time period for the certificates of finding just came, that came out of a specific request from the ARB is why that we're kind of honed in on that with this request.
All right, but if this is something that needs to be fixed, we couldn't just advertise another public hearing and fix it all at once?
Yeah, as I said, the zoning permit, we already have the proposed reduction of that timeline, I think, to 2 years in the proposed update. Conditional use permit, I'd be leery of shortening that time. Usually those conditions are necessary for them to move forward with the development. So, again, there may be a lag in terms of the scope and scale of that development, but a 5-year window for that probably is more appropriate for them. Again, conditions that need to be met for the development would need to be met in order for them to likely get the occupancy permit or to utilize it.
But that 5-year window wouldn't also be, if the logic here for the ARB is that within 5 years, things may actually have changed in the ordinance.
Correct.
Isn't it also possible that uses were conditional in 5 years may no longer be conditional?
They could. I'll need to check that one because off the top of my head, there may be a state code provision that restricts that to a 5-year requirement, but I don't know. But again, we can look at that one. I think it's probably more appropriate to look at that in the context of the.
And the reason why I bring all of this up, of course, is it's easier for the applicant when when things match, right? So if we're looking at 2 sections of ordinance directly below one another, one says 5, one says 2, okay.
Good point.
Sure. Okay, so as you mentioned, so there's an existing section that stipulates the approval of a finding of an architectural compatibility zoning permit or CUP shall be valid for 5 years after the date of approval, before becoming null and void unless construction is substantially underway during such period. The new proposed language would state that any certificate of finding shall expire on its own limitation 2 years from the date of issuance if the work authorized is not commenced by the end of such 2-year period. Further, any such certificate shall also expire and become null and void if such authorized work is suspended or abandoned for a period of 2 years after being commenced. Prior to the expiration of a certificate, upon written request and with reasonable cause, the Architectural Review Board may extend the validity of any such certificate for a period not to exceed 1 year.
From 5 to a maximum of 3.
Right, so you would have the 2 with the 1 year extension, yes, sir. This language is sort of what was what we started with, kind of pitching to council and got the direction to start moving on. We did have a couple of considerations from staff that we just wanted to put out there for you all to consider. One would be potentially decreasing the amount of time that work could be abandoned from 2 years down to 6 months. Again, the 2-year period for abandonment of work is it's very generous and could potentially leave us in a place where someone begins work or abandons work, begins it again briefly, and then they have the chance to abandon it again for up to 2 years. The 6 months.
6 months. You go up to 2 years if you do it every 6 months. If I start every 6 months, do a little bit of the work on it, it just starts another 6 months, right?
Right, but
Or
it
am I
gives
reading
us
that
the.
wrong?
We would have the option to begin that dialogue after 6 months as opposed to a 2-year wait.
But after 5 months, if I do something, my 6 months start over again, right?
Sure, yes, sir. I think you could, as long as you're not exceeding that 6 months, right, you wouldn't be subject to the nullification of the approval.
And I don't have to do the whole thing in 6 months.
Right. Again, it's not about finishing the work. It's about starting and actively, working
Gotcha.
on it. The other potential change would be setting a separate expiration time frame for certificates that are related to addressing active violations. We've seen quite a few of those over the last couple of years where someone does work in the district without the proper approvals. Then they come in and if the work is denied, they will then come with a second request to essentially go back to what they removed. But as it's written now, this would give them that 2-year period to begin correcting a violation, whereas we would see the distinction between a new project that is proposed and went through the proper channels versus one that is reacting to fixing an active violation. So if you all wanted to consider just dropping that period down, so the 2 years would apply for a new project, the 6 months would apply if you are addressing an active zoning violation.
Sorry, Jared, if I can just interject, because in many cases, the zoning violation itself is the failure to obtain a certificate of finding from the ARB before proceeding with the work. So the difficulty for us becomes is we lose that zoning enforcement leverage once they have received the certificate of finding. And so we're reliant on that. So this would give, again, that truncated timeline for them to bring the project into compliance in those instances.
Would 6 months be enough for them to appeal the decision that it's wrong?
They could certainly provide the appeal. The appeal is heard within 90 days if they are appealing a zoning administrator determination.
So they only have a 30-day period after the denial to appeal, and then typically
The
it's
ARB.
with, right.
Yeah, there's the two different types of appeals that could be taking place.
Sure. The options tonight would, in terms of recommendations, would be to recommend that town council adopt the changes as originally drafted, to recommend the changes in part, which that could be adopting one or the other of the proposed sections, or adopting with these changes we just discussed with the reduction in expiration for violations, or the 6-month period for abandonment of work. And then recommending the town council does not adopt the proposed changes to the zoning ordinance. So again, staff were directed to bring these changes for planning commission consideration at council direction based on a request they received from the ARB. The ARB believes these changes would be beneficial for preservation efforts in the historic district, in terms of setting more reasonable timeframes and bringing the process for certificates of finding into closer conformance with other public hearing type items in the code. So with that, I thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Mr. Cruz, the way it's written, the ARB and the violations and all that, what's the worst possible outcome? What happens to somebody who's been repeatedly cited, say, this is wrong, you need to fix it, and they just keep pinging the ARB and saying, I've done everything I can, really.
And they don't fix it.
And they don't fix it.
So I would say worst case scenario that we've sort of lived through was one that came back 4 separate times. The same request came back to the ARB. 2 of those times were appealed. This was over the course of 6 years. And ultimately, sort of through that attrition and through a turnover in some of the memberships and some of the boards, that decision ultimately got overturned by council. So this violation that had sort of been pursued over those years up to the point that the town had legal representation and court dates scheduled to redress the issue. It then with the overturning of that decision.
Okay, what happens if they don't overturn it?
If they don't, then it would remain. In that case, we would have ended up with a trial whereby the courts would kind of place their
Put something
redress
in
on
there
it.
where you're gonna fine them $15 a day, or something like that, until they fix it. After a 2-year period.
It becomes,
Homeowners Association do that all the time.
yeah, that's private though.
Okay.
We unfortunately have to play by a different set of rules.
Well, not with the ARB. That is a homeowners association in the town, run by the town.
Of sorts, but there's still different ways in terms of the penalties that can be applied
Oh,
because it is
sure.
part of the zoning ordinance. The provisions of the historic district.
Everyone in the historic district signed that it's okay for them to be in the historic district. At one time they did, or not, the majority of them, maybe not every.
You're right. Again, when it was initially established, there may have been a majority that indicated a willingness, but it's certainly not the case currently of many of the homeowners. So again, our goal is not necessarily to be punitive. Our goal is to get to compliance on these issues. What's being proposed just helps us to hopefully get there a little bit quicker.
You charge
again,
them and
I
you
know.
get there a lot faster.
Believe you me, I would like to.
Yeah, I understand. Okay. If you go to court, what would you be asking?
Like Andrew mentioned, so the technical violation would be commencing work without an approved certificate of finding from the Architectural Review Board. So in terms of staff, we would be presenting dates and correspondence and decisions, when those decisions were upheld, what enforcement
What would you
measures.
expect the court to do in your favor?
So the court they will generally place a fine, but I think the court order to redress the issue just has a bit more muscle than
Because
we at the zoning violation level.
ultimately,
have.
failure to do that if a court order has been put in place is contempt of court.
Or you go to jail?
You can go to jail.
That sort of get their attention.
Certainly. All right, if there are not any other questions for staff, I'd like to open the public hearing for the zoning ordinance text amendments for ordinance section 27-352. The public hearing is open. Anyone? Okay, everybody who doesn't want to speak, raise their hand. No, I'm teasing. All right, hearing none, seeing none, the public hearing is closed. Is there any discussion or a motion?
Make a motion?
Yes, sir.
Move forward to this town council with our recommendation for approval.
Is there a second?
I would like to amend the motion, that we send this to the town council with the recommendation to approve with the staff adjustment to the 6-month from the 2-year. So option 2.
Essentially, there were almost 3 options. Option 2 was the 2 years to the 6 months on the commencement of work and sort of the recommencement of work. And then we had also raised the 6 months from 2 years option on addressing violations.
So so it would be the complete language on this slide if you're looking to capture both of those adjustments.
Right, so yeah, so my amendment to the motion would be that we send it to council recommending
No problem with that.
this text on the screen now, yeah. Staff.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Very good. We will send that to town council with a recommendation of approval. Conditional use permits, CUP 4375-2023. Staff will introduce an application to establish a commercial recreation entertainment use on a property.
Thank you. So CUP 4375 is a request to establish a commercial recreational or entertainment facility at 1550 North Main Street. More specifically, the applicant is seeking to reestablish a roller skating rink at the property. excuse me. The property zone C3 general commercial because commercial recreation is a conditional use in the C3 district. The permit is required. So as you all know, this property had previously been used as a skating rink from around from the late 70s through 2020 when it closed. That use was allowed to continue during that time without a CUP since it had been established prior to the ordinance standards. It would have required a conditional use permit. It would have been considered a legally non-conforming use. With that use, however, being discontinued for a period exceeding 2 years, the property lost that non-conforming status, which is what gets us to needing the conditional use permit to reestablish the use. With this site being somewhat unique, in reestablishing a conditional use rather than developing from scratch, we've had several preliminary conversations with the applicant, looking at possibilities to bring the site into closer conformance with the modern zoning standards. On this slide, it's a little hard to make out. You can see that what the applicant had provided in terms of a development plan. So the basis is the 1975 approved plan, and he's sort of marked it up to clarify where, first, where certain development items on the site never occurred, like some of the parking spaces were never paved. And then secondly, they were looking to outline some of the work proposed by the applicant to meet the modern standards. So I just wanted to zoom in a little bit where you can kind of see more of the detail. As you can see here, there's a demarcation showing, you can see sort of the squiggly lines. That's where parking was originally proposed but never installed. They've also indicated street trees along the North Main Street frontage. That would be a current requirement. They're showing some expansion of the parking area. They're showing the establishment of ADA parking spaces. That would be both a local and a federal requirement. They've got a few accessory structures out front that would be at odds with the current zoning ordinance, so those are going to be removed. They may have already been removed. I know they were working on it. Another section of the site, you can see they've got a bike rack. They've got the parking shown. Another section that wasn't paved, and they've got some buffer trees shown. This would be on the side between them and Dominion Apartments. They've got a similar buffer on the other opposite side of the site as well. So the goal tonight would be just to introduce this permit request and give you guys some level of familiarity with the proposal. I would disclaim we're still working with the applicant on some of the finer points, and we'll be planning to provide an updated development plan once for the public hearing. Excuse me. We'll also be producing a staff report for that meeting where we'll kind of dive deeper into the request. But again, just wanted to introduce it tonight at kind of a high level. In general, it certainly appears that the community is in support of the requested use, and it's unique that the site did operate as a skating rink for 40 years. And again, if the use hadn't been discontinued for longer than that 2 years, it would have been permitted to continue without the additional approvals. That being said, the site is substandard compared to modern zoning standards, and while it wouldn't necessarily be reasonable to develop the site to be fully compliant in every regard with the ordinance, you do have the opportunity in this process to review the improvements proposed by the applicant, as well as with it being a conditional use permit, you all have the ability to set conditions for approval. These could include those changes as presented by the applicant, but also if you all see other features would want to see other features to ensure the site would not have adverse effects on public health and safety or any detriment to the surrounding neighborhood. With that, I'm happy to try to field any questions.
I have one.
Sure.
What zoning would this fit into without a conditional use permit?
Currently, the commercial recreation is only allowed in our two industrial districts, M1 and M2.
Would you make it an M1 or M2?
I don't know what the preliminary discussions were. I think the C3 zoning is more in line with our comprehensive plan and the rest of the zoning on that.
You got something that's been 20 years, has been a skating rink, and we got it zoned improper.
John.
We rezoned the town 100 times.
Again, I'll state from my perspective, it's the appropriate zoning. It matches the surrounding zoning. It is a permitted use with a conditional use permit. So again, it's a recognition. The difficulty with doing this, rezoning this to an industrial one, is the other uses that could go in there. Again, the person who's operating this is not the owner of the property. The owner of the property does not see the skating rink as the long-term use of that property. So I'd be very leery of supporting an industrial type designation there, with what's surrounding it, what's anticipated to be surrounding to the rear, because again, it immediately abuts the Dominion Apartments residential development.
And they're building a lot there.
Right, and again, we've got a lot of interest in sort of the Ashglow project that sits behind it. That's being explored by a number of different developers. So I think the commercials is probably the appropriate one.
Okay.
But again, this is the opportunity to still have that legally permitted there, just with the appropriate conditions that the commission and council feel.
I have a question. Do you have any sense from the applicant what their timeline is for being open?
They are open.
They're open.
They are open.
They have been issued a notice of violation.
Okay.
Again, we're not intending to be punitive, we're just working towards compliance, but they have been issued a notice of violation. No court date or anything along those lines has been set yet, with the recognition that we're working with them to go through the appropriate process. There was a miscommunication early on where they called up and asked if it could be reopened as a skating rink. We said it could. There are steps that need to be followed, and that was taken as yes.
Yeah.
So,
No steps.
And then one other question. And I mean, because of the sort of this whatever levels of state of emergency that were called in during COVID, it's just surprising to me that there's no relief from some of these like 2-year. I mean, how could they possibly operate in 2020 or 2021? And if you extend, right, that's just very confounding.
and it's difficult because it's written into town code, but it's town code directly taken from state code in terms of that grandfathering nonconformity. So and again, the difficult thing is, had they been open even for a day in there, 2 days, it would have been sufficient. But it really was sat unused, and as the applicant can attest, the amount of damage that actually took place in that time and the work that they had to do to get it back into a usable condition has been significant.
This operator is exactly the same operator who was there.
No,
No, it's a different
Who's
person.
totally different.
totally different.
I do believe that they may be family members. They're married into the family, something to that effect.
Okay.
He was explaining to me.
Director Hopewell, what was the exact date that they ceased operations?
I don't recall off the top of my head. We do have it clearly documented that it is in excess of the 2 years.
Couple months?
Again, it was 2020, I believe, was when it ceased.
It was probably March of 2020 when the governor said shut everything down.
And then it was.
Do we know for sure that it was COVID that shut it down, though? I wasn't sure that it was thriving before then,
That was my understanding.
that it was the COVID thing that,
Well, no, that it was struggling to begin with, and I think then COVID was the final nail in the coffin, so to speak.
okay.
I'm still struggling to understand the 2-year time, so would that be when they fail to renew their business license? Would that be when the date of what operations ceased?
That's usually what we will utilize as the effective end date of a business is what is reported to the clerk's office for their business license.
And so the business license had not been renewed for at least 2 years.
Correct.
Thank you. Does staff or the applicant have any idea of how much, once they get the conditional use permit, apparently they have several other financial hurdles to overcome to make the site compliant, is that correct? The trees, the graveling of the drive?
Well,
or-
and Jared, feel free to jump in if I'm misstating this. The applicant does work in landscaping, and so does have some at cost type ability to install the trees and acquire the trees, the landscaping themselves. They have some of the equipment, so in terms of some of the actual site work, I think they're intending to do it themselves to minimize cost. Again, we're working to try and be as reasonable in helping to reestablish what is, I think, seen as a valued community asset. As you can see with what we're working with the proposed development plan, this is not the usual engineered plan that we respond to, but again, recognizing the unique circumstances involved here, we're working with the applicant as best we can to get it to a place where it's compliant with the code and able to operate.
We recently had another case, there was, similar conditional use for the ADU that just required a hand-drawn, right? So the applicant presenting something that's at least overlaying a site plan is in some cases more engineering. At least it's
Correct.
right. At least everything's to scale.
A scale drawing is
Yeah.
essentially what's required,
Yeah.
but,
Okay.
so again, it does meet the code requirements.
Yeah. All right. And we can look at, everybody at this table can look at this and see what they're trying to do. Yeah. Okay.
Any other discussion on this particular item?
I just have one. So what is the timeline for us then? When will we see this again?
Well, we have the potential, if there was additional discussion, to have it on the work session next week again, if there's further discussion warranted. We were anticipating having it at the public hearing in December.
Okay.
Again, looking to try and get this through the
Yeah.
process and to an approved state as quickly as
That's
possible.
good. Yeah.
I would just note that there are some things, again, that we're sort of fine-tuning with the applicant. I know he's eager with the trees in particular, and some of those species that he's got called out, we would have issues with. Also, Dominion has lots of power lines that they would... so things like that, and some of the clarification of those parking areas that aren't really parking areas, us needing him to kind of indicate these aren't for parking, those type things. So I'm anticipating we're supposed to meet next week and hopefully get an updated plan, but some of this is subject to change. I would just leave it at that.
I just had a question, well, first a comment, I'm glad we're working with them on this, because people are pretty thrilled to have this back in operation, and I think it's a great opportunity when we can find the appropriate trees that would meet everybody's standards, I guess, like you said, the power lines and all that, especially on the sides to buffer from the housing. I think it's a great opportunity to get that going. My question was about lighting. Do they, with all this parking and everything, does any of that have to change, or are they good with that? Do we have to make a
They have
condition?
existing lighting. It wouldn't necessarily come into play here. I think if you all had questions on it, you could potentially request a photometric, or that could be a condition of approval before they get a CO. But in general, the lighting is existing. It's a little bit hard to make out on the...
Yeah, but it goes around to the back parking and all,
Well, there is no back parking.
Okay.
It's shown on here, but it was
Right.
never actually
but there's never,
constructed.
okay, I haven't been
Yeah.
back behind it, so.
Yeah, it's a little bit. He goes from using the squiggles to using pavement ends labels, so that
Oh,
behind
okay,
you've got a
okay.
portion of parking on, plan south there, and then it cuts where that
I
that
see.
accessory.
Oh, I
building
see,
is.
okay.
So just to take a step back, we're in a strange situation where the building itself and the structure and the site is usable for by right C3 uses today without any necessary amendments to the site for them to go in. Again, we have to make sure they have adequate parking in terms of number of spaces, but that would be essentially the extent to which we'd have it. it's only back as a conditional use permit because of this commercial recreation use. So again, we're trying to put some reasonable conditions in terms of upgrading it to current standards, but looking to be not overly onerous and burdensome, and again, not knowing that it did operate up to through 2020 on this site in a relatively safe manner without, concerns to public safety. Looking to keep that in mind.
Right. But the only note on that is that a lot of that housing right around it didn't exist, right?
Yep.
So something like directional lighting is a big deal.
Sure. Agreed. Well, that's why it's sort of looking to have the enhanced screening along that
Right,
boundary.
that's what I was,
Yeah.
screening and the lighting to protect the housing is what I was thinking of.
Just because my memory doesn't serve me. Go ahead, Mr. Clemens.
No, I'm good.
How many apartments can you put on that 5 acres with the current zoning?
Multifamily units in those ones, I believe, are 24 units per acre. So on 5 acres, you'd be looking at 120, a maximum density of 120 apartments. Again, with the need to provide the infrastructure, parking, and everything else, I very much doubt you'd be able to do it at that yield, but
The maximum.
from pure math calculation, 120, it would be the number.
Thank you. Significantly larger impact,
Yeah.
Yes.
by right. All right, is there any other deliberation over this conditional use permit? Moving on to other business,
No other business to report?
follow-up items,
No follow-up items?
planning director updates.
The one I'll give you is, if you remember, we received the grant from the Safe Streets for All to work on our transportation plan for a Vision Zero plan. Mr. Pancotti is leading those efforts now. We currently have a survey out where we're seeking input on a variety of different transportation modes in the town, issues of concern. So we ask if you could look to spread the word as much as you can about that. We'll follow up tomorrow with a link to that survey for you. It has gone out through a press release. It is going out through various other sources as well. And so we are going to be following that up later on as well with an interactive version as well, in terms of enabling people to actually mark locations on a map that they believe to be problematic and provide us some feedback on those as well.
Excellent. And so we could either talk about the work session or do the commission members' discussion first. So we plan on having the work session, and more than likely, do you feel, Mr. Cruz, that the applicant's going to have enough information for that to come back for the work session with additional information?
It would be tight, but I'm happy to, if you all have additional considerations, I mean, anything we can sort of talk through before the public hearing, I think is beneficial to all of us, so.
If it works for the commission, we'll put it on. If there are no new updates, but we can essentially gloss over it fairly quickly, but that way at least it's on the agenda.
Very good.
Again, our plan is to meet early next week, so I would say hopefully, yes.
Very good. Commission member discussion. Mr. Clements.
I have nothing today.
I'm having a moment.
I can't
Ms.
think-
Taylor.
I can't think of anything, really today.
I've already proven I have nothing. Mr. Director?
The only thing for me is I will be out of the office for the next several weeks, so I will not be at the work session next week. I leave you in the capable hands of the other planning staff. And if you do need things, you can route it through the office, and I will look to address it if they're not able to as soon as I get back.
Look at that, we get a new guy and you can run. Good for you.
By the way, can we disapprove his being out?
I don't think
No,
that's
good for you.
Miss Clancy said the same thing at council committee.
I guess even directors are allowed vacation.
That's right.
All right, well,
Motion for adjournment?
So moved.